We're going to let people trickle in for a few more, maybe one more minute, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Right.
Morning.
Good morning, Christy. All right, looks like we've already got about 25 folks with us. That's good. Well, welcome everyone to our July quarterly meeting. A couple of announcements just before we dive in. We usually try to ask if anyone present from the media is on the call, just because we like to make sure that folks are on notice if that's the case. So if anyone from the media is here, please go ahead and post your name and affiliation in the chat box. And just to remind everyone that, the meeting is broadcast live by the Tahoe Truckee media. So because of this, even if media folks aren't present in our chat today, please note that the meeting could still be covered by the media at some point. So it's important for everybody to note, because I know our partners want to ensure that communications are as accurate as possible. So Christine, if you could just note that in the chat box, that would be great for anyone who joins us late. Welcome, Dan. Dan Martin from Tahoe Truckee Media. We're happy to have you. So the theme for today's meeting, given that I try to have one for each one of our quarterly meetings, could be described as, the questions surrounding how do we ready our community properly for housing? And in doing so, how do we help to ensure its success once it does come online, so to speak? So whether that's providing the right education for our community, coming up with replicating and or connecting on really creative solutions or other approaches that other entities have had, experimenting with new ideas and approaches, revisiting that which is out of date to find a better approach, forming new entities where there are gaps, seeing where our highest needs exist, taking things into our own hands, ensuring that we have a strong presence in Sacramento and with the federal government when it comes to housing policies, partnering with our businesses, overlapping on connected topics when it comes to our forests and other issues, and more. Just making sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be in terms of our lessons learned and in learning from that and coming up with our new housing. So because our partners have continued to work so hard on a number of our program solutions, we are going to do as we did in April and kind of prioritize some of our partner highlights and important housing initiatives at the forefront of the meeting. Any changes we've had, pilot programs, press releases, and more. And then, of course, we will still have a regular working group and in-house business updates, with my hope that everyone kind of leaves the meeting with new ideas on how we can get out ahead of everything and anything that we tackle when it comes to housing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick glimpse at the mission of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, how we try to serve our community, as well as an overview of our programs, although I would say this doesn't capture everything that we do every day and all that we're working on, because we try to be very emergency response oriented and kind of in the moment. Our board of directors, as well as our very dedicated staff at Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, which is expanding rapidly, thankfully, because of all the programs that we're working on and all of the needs. So finally, I'm also going to post a list of our current partners for anyone who doesn't know who we are. We are up to 29 partners, which is really exciting. I'm also going to put up the MHC meeting agreements, which we do at the beginning of all of our meetings. I know all of you are always very respectful of each other, but we just want to remind anyone and everyone that we want to be respectful of each other's opinions, as well as let you know that you should feel free to send any messages you want to put out there in the chat as well. And finally, before we launch into stories from the community, here's a glimpse of our agenda and when we will be breaking and kind of what we will be covering. We won't have breakout sessions today, so we will likely end hopefully a little bit early. So that's just a glimpse of our agenda. And we can launch right into our stories from the community. Christina, do we have Matthew on with us?
Yes, I did see him.
Great. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for your presentation yesterday evening and for joining us again this morning. Matthew Jedra from the Tahoe National Forest is going to provide a glimpse of what he spoke about yesterday evening for anyone who missed it on housing for forest workers, kind of the crisis surrounding that in our region, and how that affects our region. So with that, Matthew, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away. After Matthew, we have Skye Schnell, who is the co-founder, treasurer, and policy chair of Shelter JH, who's going to talk a little bit about his organization and how they're working on, quote, changing the rules for housing. So go ahead, Matthew, if you want to provide us for a 5 to 10 minute overview.
Perfect. Thanks, Tara. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Matt Jedra, the acting forest supervisor here on the Tahoe National Forest. Our headquarters is located in Nevada City, but we have offices in Truckee, as most folks know. We've got another office in Sierraville, another one in Forest Hill, and one up there in Camptonville, and partially in Nevada City as well. So yesterday we had a great discussion about housing and the struggles that we face, with the U.S. Forest Service here on the Tahoe National Forest. I kind of given over some highlights that we talked about with the Joint Powers Authority that's local in Truckee, where we're looking to utilize the 2018 Farm Bill that gives the agency the authority to build and construct homes, high density housing on federal land under a special authority through the Farm Bill, utilizing external entities. We try to get our partners involved, the Joint Powers Authority, which is local there in Truckee, to be able to build a facility on our administrative sites on the National Forest. The one location we have, there's a little conflict with the runway or the flight path of the airport for its exact location. So we've got another one in mind there. And for folks that are local there in the Truckee area, it's the Hobart Work Center, just north of Truckee, right off 89. So that is our second option that we're kind of pursuing. But that location doesn't have a lot of services, doesn't have, electric, sewer, water, et cetera. So we're just kind of exploring the idea of how do we look at funding opportunities to get that, as a next step for some high density homes, single family dwellings, to be able to provide opportunities for our forest workers and our employees at somewhat of a reasonable cost, and then expanding that out to the neighborhood. We talked a lot about what can folks do. That was a question asked by a couple people on the call yesterday. And we look at where the partners, where the Mountain Housing Council and other folks that are local can really help us out. Our entry level firefighters and our forest workers that come in that GS, general salary 3, 4, and 5, sometimes 6s, which is in that 25 to 30, maybe $50,000 a year annual salary. These are all temporary workers that come in. They staff our hotshot crews, our fire engines. These are all folks that also come on board to help out on our wildlife crews, our timber crews, et cetera. So these are the temporary workforce that we bring on. We've got about 67 beds on the forest that we use for temporary housing for our employees. However, none are located on the Truckee district or in the town of Truckee. A couple of them up in Sierraville. Majority of them are on our front side from Camptonville all the way down to Forest Hill. So, when it comes into to staffing wise, we're fully staffed on our engines, all of our hotshot crews, everything for the Tahoe, we're fully staffed. We did have to augment our days, instead of 7-day effective, we're now at a 5, just because we couldn't get the workers. Okay, we couldn't get the employees to come work for the National Forest System because of housing was our number one concern. Folks now are living in Reno, they're living up farther north. A lot of folks live down in Auburn area that come up and they commute. So an hour to an hour and a half drive is not uncommon for a lot of our staff. And this is not only a concern for our temporary folks, this is also a concern for our permanent staff. So we have a tremendous amount of vacancies on the forest. We fly jobs quite often. And when people apply for those, I always tell folks during an interview, you got to look and see what's the housing. It is extremely expensive in Truckee. Your median home is over $1 million. So where do you look for additional housing? And then when we offer jobs, they come out, they do a house hunting trip and say, there's no way they can afford that, even on a GS9 or a GS11 salary, which is, comparable range for most of our middle management in that, $60,000 to $90,000 range for salary. And it's just tough for them. So as we move forward, we're looking at other options. We're looking at other locations where we can have additional employee housing. We're building a new campus for the Tahoe National Forest Supervisor's Office in Nevada City. We're looking at possibilities of adding government barracks there, government housing in that location. We're trying to look at other spots where we can use some of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that hopefully is going to be coming down board for us to be able to secure some of that for some of our housing for our folks. But it's a huge concern for us. And I don't think it's strictly to the Truckee region or the Tahoe National Forest. This is up and down in California. I mean, you folks are well aware of that. So we're really trying to find out what are those other options and other ways that we can really look at partners, look at externals, to be able to look at grant options, to be able to fund some of these housing communities for our folks. We have such a hard time recruiting and staffing that it's becoming, it's becoming a big concern for us because we look at the turnover, we look at the attrition rate. But right now, like I said, we're trying to find some other options there, looking at other partners that maybe can lead the way as we explore more on the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill authority that we have. So I mentioned on the call yesterday, that authority come out in 2018. That has to be completed and signed, your process by October of 23. That being said, there's 3 forests in the agency that I know that are going through this process. The Tahoe's one of those, the Inyo National Forest down in Bishop. They're looking at some under the same authority for the community of Mammoth, and then the White River National Forest in Western Colorado. They are the farthest along using this authority from some local housing. So we're trying to follow the footsteps of this and see if we can actually make it and come to fruition. A lot of hoops to jump through. As you know, a new authority, everybody's not really sure on how you're going to use it, how it's going to be effective. So we're kind of treading lightly, but we're hoping to have something in place and have something signed by that October 23rd deadline. But, funding is going to be a big piece of this. Yeah, and, I just want to appreciate everybody, on this call and Christina, this is such a fantastic topic. We talk about this at every one of our leadership calls here in Region 5, which covers our 18 national forest. We had a meeting last week from our chief, Randy Moore, to talk about this at a national level, what we're doing about housing. So it is a huge concern for us, and we're trying to find other ways to be able to house our employees. A lot of the ones that we used to have for rentals where the agency would rent from local folks in the community, a house or two, those have all gone up to, you folks are aware of short-term rentals, Airbnb and verbal markets. So that supply isn't there anymore for us. So this has been great. Hope that answers a lot of questions. I'm here for a little bit to kind of talk a bit more through this, but thanks for last night and thanks for today. This has been great. It's such an important topic for us locally, and I know it is for you guys as well. So I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. Well, we appreciate your partnership in all of our programs. I hope we're not running you dry in terms of relying on you.
No, absolutely not. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, before we move on to Shelter JH, are there any questions for Matt? All right, great. Well, Matt, if you stay with us for just a few minutes, folks may post some in the chat for you. So thank you again. All right, Sky. Yes.
Terrace, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's Jen Sharp from Palisades, Tahoe. I'm joining via my phone and I couldn't unmute quickly enough. Thanks for that presentation. I do have a question though. I'm sure that you're looking for a mix of housing for your team. Is there an influx or a larger need in the summer? And I guess the reason I'm asking is obviously we have a larger need in the winter. Where there, as we start to look at our housing opportunities that might be coming down the pipe, would you be interested in partnering if the need is larger in the summer with a larger or smaller employer in the area where, the employer may sublease in the summer if there's room? I don't know if I articulated that
Yes,
question
you sure
very
did.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, we sure do. So our biggest need is between the months of May through early November. That's
Okay.
when we bring on all of our temporary staff for our fire folks, all of our specialists, our survey crews, all of those come on between the months of May and November, and then we kind of drop right down once it comes into early to mid-November. So yeah, there's a huge seasonality flex with that.
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll get your contact and give you mine, and we can keep talking. I foresee that we may have an opportunity for a summer partner to fill in some spots that we might have that we're not using as heavily, in our off seasons. So
Okay.
that's
Perfect.
great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll drop my email here in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks for your question, Jen.
Derek, can I ask one thing?
Sure. Go ahead, John.
Oh, thank you very much. Matt, I was wondering, this is a problem, of course, that Mountain Housing Council has been dealing with forever, for the both iterations of its existence, is the fact that the affordability and availability of housing for rent, both seasonally and long term, is, the supply and demand is just way out of whack, and it's not going to be easily solved. One of the things that I see as a real low piece of hanging fruit that could be plucked is, as you know, the state of California says that all new construction of ADUs cannot be used for short-term rentals. So if you build an ADU in the last 2 years and going forward, you can't ADU it. It can't be used as an STR. So with that said, one of the options that retains some flexibility but would be valuable to the homeowner who creates the ADU would be to add additional incentives to hire seasonally from both camps, the public camp and the private camp. The public camp being your sector in the summer months, and then the private camp would be, like the large ski resorts and other services that ramp up their employee profile in the peak season of winter. And so it seems that either working in tandem with having a package of incentives or working independently to have summer season and winter season incentives that might be financial, they might be non-financial, but I think there's ways that we could make this an extraordinarily attractive option for people with newer ADUs to pursue, to have a reliable source of income month over month from good people that we know have been well vetted. So just a thought that I would be willing to help pursue if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's there's a way for that because we have such a consistent flow of seasonal work. Every year between May and November, in Truckee, we probably bring on, probably close to 40 to 50 people in that temporary workforce that start in May and the end of November. So, and yes, they're all vetted. They're all fantastic folks. The government pays its bills type thing. So, I think that's great. Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that point. Jan, did you have a question? Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Matt. We really appreciate you coming to speak with us on multiple occasions and, working with us on our programs. You're a fantastic partner to have. All right. Well, great. Sky, we have you from Shelter JH.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Sky Shell. I am one of the board members and helped start Shelter JH back in 2016 and have been just part of it ever since. I guess I'll give the quick version and then happy to answer questions. So we're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We actually look to you all at the Mountain Housing Council as a great example that we're hoping to copy in Jackson. So I am very excited to be here. And anyone who has tips on how to get this started, I know we have one part-time staff person, actually two, but one who's been working on this, who's been in touch with your folks, but definitely we're looking for resources as well. So thanks for having me. Shelter JH is a 501c4. So we are a advocacy, lobbying, and we get involved in elections. So our purpose and our mission is to advocate for building grassroots and political power to address housing insecurity in the Tetons. So that's mostly the Wyoming side, but we see our area as a region much like you all do. So, Jackson, Wyoming, Teton Valley, Idaho, down towards Alpine, really that whole region. And we have basically a 30-year housing crisis. The mid-'80s was the last time median income could afford median home. I'm sure it's the same where you are. And there's been a couple housing developers. Habitat for Humanity builds homes, the Jackson Hole Community Housing Trust. There was a Teton County Housing Authority. So over the last 30 years, there have been good efforts to build homes. And I moved out here from Seattle back in 2014 and got involved in the Teton County Housing Authority. And there was a project called The Grove, and it was a great project moving forward. Costs were going up like they were everywhere. And a small but very loud group of people who live here started to attack the project and just, throwing out all kinds of allegations of this is government fraud and waste and just really over the top. And being part of the Housing Authority, I and my colleagues couldn't do anything to respond, and no one else was coming forward. So Habitat sat it out, the Housing Trust sat it out. They were all, hoping to get land and money from that project, basically take it away from the Housing Authority, give it to these private groups. So it was a really unfortunate situation where people were attacking good, affordable housing and nobody was standing up for it. So that was sort of my introduction to the topic. Out here in Jackson, I'd worked in housing policy. In Seattle, worked in street outreach and homelessness in New York. So, sort of been familiar with it in different areas. But coming to Jackson was really shocked to see there's nobody standing up for community housing. So a few other people were also feeling the same thing. So a woman named Mary Erickson, who's still our board chair now, had been running the local, it was called the Community Resource Center, that later merged with the Latino Resource Center and another group to become a group called 122, which is sort of like the main human service resource provider. There was a local Latino man, Jorge Moreno, who had been doing organizing in his community. And basically we got together, said, we have to do something. So we held a rally on Town Square, marched over to Town Hall. People were sharing their stories, went into Town Hall, shared the stories there. And at that point, we really didn't know what we were doing other than we need to raise awareness and put this issue squarely on the table for the elected representatives. But so many people showed up and it really made a splash that we said, let's turn this into an organization and keep working together. So that was 2016. We spent a lot more time and energy than I wish we had on the organizational side of, becoming incorporated and getting our tax status with the IRS, and all of that took so much time, and we were all volunteer, had no staff. So sort of stalled out for a few years. We were still there. We would show up at town council, county commission meetings, but, we just had a few members. And then back in 2020, kind of the stars aligned, and we had a couple people willing to give $1,000, $4,000, $5,000. So we put together a $10,000 budget and hired our first part-time staff person, which is Claire. She's still with us. And she took us from 8 members. So we're a dues-paying member organization. We are currently at 498. So our goal has been to hit 500, and we're almost there. So she's done a fantastic job. A lot of social media work, just getting the word out among renters, low-income folks, trying to build this movement from the ground up. So I'll share a couple links. Basically, we try to work on all sides of the issue. So we're doing advocacy, we're doing education of our membership in the community, and then we're getting ready to put out endorsements for the town council and county commission and state legislature races. And our goal is, if we can get housing champions in office, then we can work with them to get better policy. So we also have a policy platform looking at big developments and how to get them more focused on, deed restrictions for local workers, ideally at different categories of affordability, working on inclusionary zoning for up zones, looking at how we can loosen up zoning rules to allow for, duplexes in single family areas or more ARUs that are deed restricted for local workers, et cetera. So I think that's the basic overview. We're still small, we're still scrappy, we don't have a lot of money, but we've been able to get a couple grants. Social Justice Fund Northwest has been a fantastic foundation to work with. And because we're a 501c4, it means donations are not tax deductible. So it's harder to get, philanthropy here in Jackson. Also, because we're very much we're ground up advocating for people who are not part of the ruling class. It's harder to get money from the ruling class. But the members are growing. People are kicking in $20 a year or $20 a month. So we're sort of slowly and steadily growing. And our long-term goal is to have 1,000 members, maybe even 2,000 members someday, where we can really make an influence on those local elections and then bring good policy from other places. Like I mentioned, we want to set up a Teton Housing Council modeled after your housing council, which we probably wouldn't be leading that. Hopefully our community foundation would take it on and we'd just be one of the many participants. But yeah, that's who we are. I'll share a couple links about who we are, our policy platform, and our election work, and happy to answer any questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sky. All right. So one question I have is, why did you feel that you had to incorporate as a 501c4 that you wouldn't have the allotted amount of lobbying that's allotted to a 501c3?
Yeah, great question. So the reason we became a C4 was so we could do electioneering, which C3s cannot do. And it can't be the primary purpose of a C4 either. So our primary purpose is the policy development, education, advocacy, lobbying, all of that. And then the elections are a small part. It's only every 2 years. It's we're putting together endorsements and sharing those. Honestly, that doesn't take a ton of time. But yeah, I previously was working at the Jackson Hole Conservation Alliance. We did a lot of civic engagement work, and it's always, people are surprised by how much lobbying you can do, by how much advocacy you can do. But when you get into the candidate side of things, that's where there is a pretty hard line for C3s. So that was why from the beginning we said, we want to be more like a renters union and able to do elections. There are plenty of 501c3s in Jackson. There's probably 300 of them, among the highest per capita nonprofit rates in the country, but there weren't any C4s. The other thing we could have done if we wanted to just do elections is we could have just been a PAC, Political Action Committee, but we really did want to do that holistic, from policy development, bringing that in, and then trying to get champions in office. And I guess the one other thing I should say is we really see ourselves as a YIMBY organization. So yes, in my backyard, and there are a lot of NIMBYs here in Jackson. So anytime there's an affordable housing project proposed, people are fighting it. Actually, next door to where I live is a 12-unit workforce project, which, honestly, not very affordable. 2-bedroom condos selling for $800K, which, people were very excited about this. And then they saw the numbers and were like, ooh, I can't afford that. But still better than nothing. And there was a whole lot of pushback to that project. So we tried to show up in support of that project and other ones like it.
Great. Thanks so much, Sky. John, go ahead with your question.
Thanks. It sounds like you're really going down the right road and you're doing it the grassroots way, which is always hard. But I just wanted to direct you towards, I represent the real estate community. I'm the lobbyist for the Tahoe Sierra Board of Realtors. And at the local level, at the state level with the California Association, and the national level with the NAR, so TSBR, CAR, and NAR all have both sides of the equation. And so we have the majority of our work is tax exempt, C3, but then we have carved out the portion that is PAC related or direct lobbying at the state level, which is controlled and also not eligible for tax deduction. And so we've carved those out. And so we just make sure that our dues paying members recognize that, 3/4 or, 5/8 or whatever of their dues is tax deductible. This portion is not, because it's going towards this activity, but it allows you to continue to engage in both sectors. It doesn't hamstring you to doing only one or doing other, or only having access to one pool of money or the other. And it's more bureaucratic paperwork, but if you're starting to get to that threshold where you can handle those types of reports and submissions, I think you would end up taking a quantum jump forward if you took the holistic approach that we've adopted. I mean, we've been incorporated since 1959, so it's nothing new here. Just a thought.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think Sky makes a really good point that maybe at some later date, we might circle back around and do a little bit of community education on, which is that 501c3s can actually do a lot more issues advocacy than many people think they can. And, there's a general rule that you can use about 20% of your resources on issues advocacy and supporting specific issues in the community, as long as you're not endorsing or working on behalf of individual candidates. And there's a lot of information out there that can help guide community-based organizations in how to comply with the IRS rules around this. And, I think it would be a good workshop to do in the community at some point, to do an educational seminar on issues advocacy within 501c3s.
That's a really good idea, Steve. I think there's a lot of confusion about to what extent you can do anything on the Hill as a 501c3. I've always been paranoid about it. And I think there is a lot more you can do. It sounds like Shelter JH did a pretty thorough analysis about how they should incorporate, but it is frustrating that it ties your hands when it comes to donations and fundraising. I can't even imagine,
Yeah, it's a really good point, Steve. And I think I've seen the same thing in Jackson, and there's so much confusion, and there are many nonprofits here who say, oh, we can't do advocacy, we're a 501c3. And actually, what I would say is there's really no limit to advocacy. There is a limit to lobbying, and that's about the 20%.
Right.
But advocacy, it's like, hey, do as much advocacy as you want. That's part of your mission. There are no limits. The IRS does not care. Like, that's education. It's doing your work. Lobbying, that's where you get into the approximately 20%, and it depends if you've taken the 501h election.
Right.
If you haven't, then it's an insignificant part. If you have, then it's about 20%, and there's a separate, direct and grassroots. So it's complicated, but it's really not too bad. But people just don't know you can do it, and it's a little scary. The best resource I know of is an organization called Boulder Advocacy. BOLDER, and they have trainings, they have resources, they have guidebooks. And one thing that we haven't done yet, but if we keep growing, we'll probably do, is have affiliated 501c3 and 501c4 organizations, which is a pretty standard practice, except nobody is doing it in Jackson, where the C3 side can more easily raise money, can do all the education, can even do 20% lobbying. On the C4 side, it might be harder to raise money, but you have a lot more freedom in what you can do. So, I think it would be really interesting to reach out to Boulder Advocacy to do that training here, because we went through it at Sierra Business Council. We have an H designation for a 501c3. We also have an associated C4, and it was the Boulder Advocacy process that kind of trained us and taught us how to do that. So that's really good advice, Sky. Yeah. So they're fantastic. I can't speak highly enough of them. Also, just as a separate plug, I left the Conservation Alliance in January, and now I'm working as a consultant, helping a variety of nonprofits. So this is basically my bread and butter. It's what I love to do. So if anybody wants sort of one-on-one help beyond, big trainings from Boulder Advocacy, reach out. I'll include info of my firm in the chat here in a minute. So would love to help out with anybody looking to do more on the civic engagement, voter data, all of that. There's a whole lot you can do. And I guess on that front, what we're doing at Shelter, we're doing endorsements, and then we have our list of about 500 members. And our priority this election cycle is getting our members to vote, because a lot of people don't vote in the primary. Primary is super important. So we're currently setting up voter data so we can make sure that our members are voting. We'll do get out the vote, phone banks, etc. That's all stuff that C3s can do, nonpartisan, get out the vote work, voter registration, etc. And a lot of folks also don't know that's allowed. You can really do a lot more in the election space than you might think, as long as you're not talking about candidates. So in a judgmental way. So you can, something we did at the Conservation Alliance was questionnaires, candidate forums. Also, one of my favorite lesser known tactics is a candidate workshop, where instead of, it's sort of the reverse of a candidate forum, you get all the candidates in a room with you, the public is not there, the press is not there, and you just talk about your issues. So you're educating the candidates. And initially I didn't think candidates would be into it, but every time we did it, they raved about it and asked for more. So that's all C3 permissible.
Interesting. Okay. Lindsay, did you have a question for Sky? Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. I just had a question, Sky, and my internet was wonky at the beginning, so maybe you said it. Your organization uses the term shelter rather than house, and that's something that's different here. I feel like we talk housing all the time and not shelter. Was there a reason you chose that?
Yeah, great question. So I don't know that we put too much thought into it. It was sort of, what we were trying to get across, both with the rally and then the name and all of that, was the housing crisis in Jackson really got to an emergency level around 2015, 2016. And what had happened, and the reason we all got together, was the largest apartment complex, which is called Blair Place, had raised rents 40%, basically overnight. And at the time, that was from $1,200 a month for a 2-bedroom to $1,800 a month for a 2-bedroom. And now that's like, wow, $1,800 a month for a 2-bedroom, not bad. And they actually just, in the past couple months, raised rent from $2,900 to $4,400. So another 40% increase. And now people are just sort of, giving up. But because Blair raised the rents 40%, and then they did something really special, which was to say, if you have a lease, we'll do 20% now, 20% in a year. If you don't have a lease, it's all 40% now. By the way, if you're undocumented, we won't let you have a lease. So essentially, like, targeting undocumented people with a higher rent increase right off the bat. So that raised some, discrimination flags for local legal aid groups. Anyway, that happened. There was another large apartment complex that turned into condos, evicted everybody basically within a week. So all of that happened at once. And so we were just seeing hundreds of families losing their homes, basically being evicted. So that's why the shelter frame was where we landed. We need shelter for people. Separately, I've been working with, there is an actual shelter that only serves single people. They're trying to raise money to build a family shelter. So that whole discussion has really been, I'd say, like, it has not been on the table. We have a pretty thorough countywide workforce housing action plan, and it doesn't mention homelessness or shelter a single time. So it's just like nobody thought about it until, now the issue is gaining a little more traction. But when we say shelter, we're not really talking about like a homeless shelter. We're just saying, hey, everybody needs a roof over their head. And our mission and kind of our focus is let's focus on the lower income brackets. So like there's a lot being done for the 80 to 120, 120 to 200, 200 and up, like plenty is happening there. Habitat does work in the 0 to 80 space, but they only build a few units a year. So we just need a lot more. So that's a long answer, but hopefully gives a little context.
Sky, do you find that there's any confusion from folks you're meeting with on the Hill, for example, that they assume you're working only on homelessness because shelter's been used in your title and you cover all areas of housing?
No, I think partly because in Jackson, and we mostly work at the local level, so town and county level. We really don't go to the state level. In Wyoming, the state legislature is so far off the deep end. Property rights, doesn't care about any of the issues we're working on, and there's a huge cultural divide between Teton County and the rest of Wyoming. So basically it's, there's no point in us going down there. The Chamber of Commerce does go down there. They have some relationships. They're working on a statewide real estate transfer tax, which we highly support, but we know that us going down there isn't going to help, might hurt. And yet at the local level, I'd say people know who we are, what we advocate for, and no one's even thinking about like homeless shelters. So they don't get confused.
Okay. Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Sky, for joining us so early. Anyone who has additional questions for Sky or Matt, please do send them to Christina or I, and we will send them on to you. Thank you again, Sky, and thank you to our community storytellers. It's always really enlightening to us to speak with you all and see all the good work you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to hop off to get to some more meetings, but really appreciated it. And I will leave my contact info in the chat and would love to talk more. So keep up the good work. You all have been an example for us.
Great. Thanks, Sky. All right. So as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to go do things similarly to how we did them in April and move straight into some specific partner updates kind of at the forefront of our meeting based on those we know about that we want to make sure every partner who works in housing is aware of. And then we will move on to kind of broader housing updates. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Emily Setzer with Placer County. She's been doing some fantastic work and some fantastic presentations at various conferences as well. Go ahead, Emily.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Slideshow. Okay, looks like that's working. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the housing initiatives we have been working on here recently in Placer. We've been focusing on some regulations and tools to preserve and expand local housing. And this is just a briefer, summarized version of a presentation we gave to the National Planners Conference in May. And then just as an aside, Devin McNally, and a housing planner in our community development office, and I will also be presenting at the One Cape presentation in Cape Cod at the end of this month. So as you all know, we've been working to create a secondary market for local workers. This is largely based on our workforce housing preservation program modeled after Vail. Our goal here is to really deed restrict enough units to create a secondary market for local worker housing. And we are doing that through down payment assistance. It's a 16% of the purchase price grant to the homeowner in exchange for deed restricting it to local workers. They can rent it out in the future. They can short-term rent for up to 30 days per year, because we know a lot of local workers do that to help pay their mortgage. And the deed restriction runs for 55 years. There are no appreciation caps under the program, so they could sell it. They just have to sell it to a local worker. So it's really relying on that local worker income as the natural cap. And it launched last summer with $500,000 of funding. We have secured one deed restriction so far and have a couple other that are, we hope, close. But we're really trying to keep getting the word out, because as much marketing as we do, I still meet so many people in the community who aren't aware of the program. So please help us share that program. Some of our takeaways, because we did recently make some modifications to the program, we learned we had a 245% area median income cap on there. And what we learned is a lot of households, because that area median income cap, the actual income for the household varies by the number of people in your household. We found out that a lot of 2 or 3 person households often were just over that 245% area median income cap in our region. So we were actually prohibiting a lot of our local workers from even applying to this program, which was definitely not our intent. We also found that it was difficult to recruit workers from the out of the area because we had a provision in there that you could not have owned a home in the last 12 months. And that means that people who if you're trying to recruit skilled labor from other areas, this program won't be available for them, or people who had maybe bought a home in Reno or Carson but want to actually move back up here where they work, it wouldn't be available to them either. So we were dealing with those challenges. We've also noticed that almost half of the home purchases in our region were cash offers last year. So we are trying to work on some cash offer programs in the future. But in the meantime, the changes we recently made to the program were we removed the income limits completely. So it's a little closer to Vail's model now, and you just have to have at least one local worker in the household. So we're really hoping that opens it up to a lot more potential buyers in our region. And then we also removed the previous homeownership exclusion. So now you could have owned a home in the last 12 months. The goal really here is not to include a lot of restrictions, but to really deed restrict as many as possible. So we do create that secondary market. We also clarified full-time worker definition, minor changes, but it was a little vague. Some people they owned their own business, sole proprietors, didn't feel like this applied to them, but it definitely does. They're eligible. And then a lot of teachers didn't meet the full-time worker definition as we had written it because they don't meet the number of hours per week over the course of the year average. So we clarified it so that they do meet that. So just learning and adapting along the way. We've also implemented our short-term rental regulations. This is a new ordinance that was effective March 31st. We instituted a cap of 3,900 units. Right now, we're not too close to the cap, but we're getting there steadily. So we're kind of close to around 3,000 once we process everything. So we're keeping an eye on that. This was based on the estimated quantity of our existing short-term rental stock, which was about 21%. This cap, though, is going to be adaptively managed. So we're keeping a really close eye on the statistics of this and the quantity of short-term rentals and all of our other housing statistics. And especially if we get new lodging, which is a goal for Placer County, then we would probably decrease that cap by the number of new lodging units. So we'll really adaptively manage that and work with our board on that. One of the key provisions here on the housing side was that we limited one short-term rental per property to preserve those multifamily properties. And that's not per parcel because we have really small parcels and wonky parcels over here at the lake. So we consider, if you have a one property, it sells as one property, but maybe it's 2 or 3 parcels, we consider that one property. So we are seeing some changes based off of that provision. We've also been working to preserve and encourage multifamily housing. So we are working on finalizing some Tahoe Basin Area Plan amendments. Those we're hoping to get adopted this winter by Placer and TRPA. So we are we're proposing to allow multifamily by right in certain zone districts if they are deed restricted to achievable. And just some background info, it sounds like TRPA is probably moving forward with a new definition of achievable that will really rely mostly on the local worker requirement and be less tied or not tied at all to income. So we're supportive of that. So we're really trying to facilitate the streamlining. It's so much easier to get development done if it's allowed by right and there's no use permit required. We're also including some policies to preserve housing. So if, like Sky was saying, some of the apartments had turned to condominiums. If that were to happen here, and we do see that sometimes, we're including a policy that half of the units must be deed restricted to achievable. And then for any new multifamily or single family in our town centers, so Kings Beach, Tahoe City, we're proposing that half of those units must also be deed restricted to achievable. So we're really relying on that achievable/local worker deed restriction in this region, and hoping to really gain some traction with that in the next few years. We've also adopted objective design standards for multifamily and mixed use to enable allowing by right. The board did just pass countywide housing related code amendments. And I think I get into that. Yep, here. So a lot of those code amendments were targeted at multifamily, infill, and mixed use. Those code amendments did allow for tiny houses as the primary residence on a parcel, or as an accessory unit, like an ADU. And they also allowed for tiny house communities. So kind of that cluster lot development. We're hoping to see some more of that. And then we're trying to focus on allowing smaller lot sizes to achieve allowed densities, particularly in places like the Kings Beach residential grid area, where the lot size didn't match what's actually on the ground there. So we're proposing to bring that back to what's on the ground and allow for more of that affordable by design development. And then we've been working closely with TRPA, with their Tahoe Living Working Group. And they did update, as you're probably aware, their ADU regulations. So they more closely match California state regs. And they allow one ADU and one junior ADU per parcel. We've also been incentivizing long-term rentals. So seeing the success that Truckee had, and then South Lake Tahoe joined in on this program too, we're going to be working with landing locals on an East Placer lease to locals program to incentivize the conversion of second home or short-term rentals to long-term rental leases. And that was tentatively approved in the last month. And then we are seeking final board approval next Tuesday, July 26th, with the plans of launching this program on August 1st. And landing has already been getting inquiries from the public based off of some media releases that we did. So we're excited to launch that program. And then we're always working on securing dedicated funding for housing. So our T-bid passed last year, and that freed up some of our transient occupancy tax, or TOT. We're looking at creative ways to use that TOT to fund housing. We have an affordable employee housing fee. And as always, we rely on tax credits and state and federal grants, but those are, not quite as useful unless you're doing the strictly 60% AMI or below apartments. We have a Placer County Housing Trust, but we are really seeking and hoping that the region up here in Nevada County, Placer County, and the town of Truckee can join together to form a regional trust as well. And then our partnerships are really key. So the Truckee Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency, working with all of you and the local jurisdictions up here, and the chambers and the business associations. And we're just really relying on stakeholder input and partnerships to get a lot of things done up here. You're probably aware we have constructed the Meadowview Place apartments. Those are in Schaefer's Mill, Martis Valley area, and that's 56 affordable units. Those are available. So if anybody is looking for affordable housing, those are available. I do know the studio or one bedroom apartments have filled up. So it's some of the more bedroom apartments, the higher bedroom apartments that are still available. Dollar Creek Crossing, we're moving forward on an environmental review for that project in Tahoe City. Hoping to go forward with a conformity review, level of environmental review, showing that it conforms to the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. If we can do that, that would be great. It would show that this more streamlined approach can work for housing in the region. So that's kind of a little experiment we're working on. And then Hopkins Village is that 40-unit for sale complex right across the street in Martis Valley, over in off Shapers Mill Road. That is deed restricted for local workers. It does have the 180% area median income cap. We're working with the developers right now to clarify some of those restrictions. We have 17 of those units under contract right now. The first one is closing this month, or next month actually. And we have 30-something people on our interested list, and 20 of the units are pending. So we hope to see most of these filled up pretty soon, but still working on qualifying applicants, and not all of them are in contract right now. So there's definitely still availability. If people in the area are interested in purchasing these, I would suggest going ahead and applying. That's just a quick summary of things we're working on. We have a few other things in the queue that maybe aren't quite ready to talk about, but excited to keep going and moving forward on all of the work that we're doing. And thanks for listening, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions at any time.
Thank you so much, Emily. This is a great presentation and a great overview of everything you guys are working on. Are there any questions for Emily based on her presentation? All right, great. Well, feel free to put them in the chat as well. And thanks again, Emily.
Thank you.
Really exciting stuff. Hillary, did you want to give a brief update on the town of Truckee, the general plan, the lease to locals updates?
Sure, I will give a couple updates. I apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over COVID. But a few exciting updates for the town, and a lot of these really parallel what Emily talked about, because we have many similar programs going on right now. But the first update I wanted to give is that we have hired our new housing analyst, who started I think in April. That's Lynn Baumgardner. She was previously with the town in our town clerk's office supporting housing behind the scenes. She's now full-time in our housing program, and she would be here today, except for she actually has today off. So I look forward to introducing her at an upcoming meeting. She's been doing great work and really has jumped right into things and helping to progress our housing programs. The town has implemented our new short-term rental regulations, including a cap of 1,255 short-term rental registration certificates that went into effect in May. And then we lifted our moratorium and opened up new applications on June 13th. We are processing the applications that came in at that time, but we now have a wait list in place. So we're sort of at that max. Any new applications that come in will be put on that wait list. And one other policy that was implemented as part of that is we do have a 1-year waiting period after a home sells before it's eligible to apply to get on that wait list. So that's sort of a cooling off period after a home sells. So that is all now in effect. We are working hard on implementing our new, coming soon, deed restriction purchase program, which is pretty similar to Placer County's Workforce Housing Preservation Program. We have a program administrator on board, and we're just setting that up right now and looking to launch that this fall. I'm hoping by late September or early October. So excited about that one. And we're also working on developing the program guidelines for a brand new housing program that will leverage a small pool of short-term rental permits as a in-kind incentive for deed restricting workforce housing. So as a result of putting a cap in place, we're really taking advantage of the fact that each short-term rental permit has a value to it. So we've set aside 25 as a starting point in a pool to use as an in-kind incentive. And then we have built into our ordinance that council can authorize additional short-term rental permits as workforce housing incentives as well. So we're really excited about that. We're not aware of any other jurisdiction doing anything quite like that. It was just a new idea that came out of our short-term rental study process this past year. So that one will be exciting. Also looking to bring that to council probably in October for launch in late 2022. And then our long-term rental incentive program, or the Lease to Locals program, we brought updates to our town council for that in April, and then we launched those updates starting July 1st. There were just some sort of cleanup amendments to the way that we run that program, but one of the exciting changes we made is we did make some increases to the grant amount, now offering up to $18,000 for housing up for regional workers. So we really looked at how can we adjust our incentive amounts to make sure that we're capturing sort of both the smaller homes as well as opening up opportunity for some larger homes to house more employees. So this is I think our third update to that program now, which has been in place since 2020. It's been super successful at this point. We have leased 76 homes through that program, housing about 115 people. So, and we've seen of the homes that leased up during the first pilot program, we have seen 2/3 of them continue leasing after that first year. So it's been really successful, both at getting homes into the program and at getting them to continue leasing long term. So I'll leave it at that for now, unless there are any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Hillary. Any questions for Hillary? All right, great. Thank you again, Hillary, and we'll come back to you to talk a little bit about Coldstream Commons and Truckee Artist Loft. All right. Mike, do you want to give us an update on Nevada County's draft action homeless plan and any other important updates there?
Okay. Thanks, Tara. Hi, everybody. Mike Dent, Director of Housing and Community Services here in the county. I don't think Jasmine's on, but Jasmine and I both sit on the Continuum of Care 531, which is Nevada County's COC. And because Truckee's so blurry up there, Jasmine always also sits on the COC 515, which is Placer County's Continuum of Care. And she's actually co-chair on that. So we're heavily involved in this homelessness coordination of services. But I think what you guys wanted us to talk about is the homeless action plan that we put together with COC 531. I put a link in the chat that goes to our Better Together portal, and in there's the actual plan. There's some of our point in time count initial data, landlord liaison programs, some other things there. Invite you to take a look at that. But also, if you want to learn more about the plan, the whole plan's there. So backing up, the state has been rolling out homeless housing assistance and prevention program monies. We're on our third round now, the biggest round yet. And they've been doing it for the last couple of years. They're administered by Cal ICH, a new department in the state. It's California Interagency Collaboration on Homelessness, something like that. So Cal ICH has been rolling the first two rounds of funding out individually to the COCs, but then also some funding to the counties. I believe it's based on your point in time count from 2019. And so obviously Placer gets a little bit more than Nevada County because the point in time count's a little higher there. But the first two rounds of funding went, here's some money for you guys, their allocations based on your point in time count. Here's your allocation county, go forward. And then the second round, they said, here's your allocation COC, here's your allocation county. At least have a meeting and talk about what you're going to spend your money on and then go forward. Well, with round three, they required if you want the money they required, that you come up with a strategic plan, an action plan. And so specifically for Nevada County, 531, COC 531, and the county where both Jasmine and I are voting members on 531, we know that the COC doesn't have the horsepower to administer. We're talking about $1.2 million for round three, about $1.2 million for round four, which should be coming out towards the end of the year. So we agreed that the county would administer the funds, and we also led the effort on the plan. So the plan, and this is all a parallel process that happened in Placer County. However, 515, the Placer County COC, was lead in administering and creating the plan and administering that. And I defer to either Placer County staff or Jasmine at a future date to go over their plan. But the Nevada County plan, we had some public meetings. We met in June, both at the COC, and we brought it to the board on the 28th and had entertained public comment. We've been trying to work on a plan since homelessness became a top priority with Nevada County Board back in 2017. We had a pretty good plan for 2020, so we took 2020's plan and moved forward. But through this interactive process, which included looking at landscape analysis of data that the state's pulling from our homeless management information system. They're doing this statewide. They say, here in Nevada County, here's your numbers. Here's what we're seeing in your homeless population. Then also the worth of money going. And so both the COC and the county had to stop and look at inside themselves to see where we're spending our money on prevention and services. One of the glaring realizations we had is I think we're only spending like 10% of our money on prevention. It's all almost providing services, which is important, but it's not prevention. And so we came up with about 5 pillars, we're calling them, in our homeless plan. And you can see that if you click on the link and you go check out the plan. But our first pillar is obviously preventing homelessness through increasing availability of rental, mortgage assistance, and expanding services to youth and family. Families have a lot of, CalWorks, a lot of funding available. It's also a critical point in a child's life to make sure they stay housed. Youth are, once you turn 18, everybody thinks they're an adult, but they're not. And so that is where we see a lot of young adults fall into homelessness and kind of stay or get involved in criminality or, their mental illness surfaces and then they're kind of lost to us and we have to try to bring them back. So we're seeing that our first priority or one of our biggest pillars is prevention. And we're going to spend our money more towards that as we implement this. Also, another pillar is strengthening supportive services through outreach, engagement, case management, navigation centers, which you guys have. We don't down here on the western side. Strengthen housing focused case management, keeping people housed once we get them housed. Our data show that a lot of our folks that are homeless that we place into some form of permanent or transitional housing wash out, for lack of a better word, in about 6 months. Not all of them, but a high percentage of them. And so how can we drop that number down? That's going to be a priority for us. Increase in shelter capacity, not just year-round shelter capacity, but also interim housing. The last 2 years has been kind of a gold mine of funding for COVID related, which allowed us to get into the motel world and non-congregate models. And we're continuing to try to add programs that give us some sort of interim, because now the hotels are kind of reopened and they don't want to deal with the county placements because they can get some on their reservation system. So we're seeing that. You guys pretty much had that challenge the whole time through COVID. We had hard troubles getting motel rooms up on western side or eastern side. Another pillar is increasing affordable and supportive housing stock. That's what I do part of my day besides child support. We're trying to get as many projects rolling or conversions happening as we can. We're talking specifically for homelessness or at-risk homelessness. And then another big pillar is to continue to communicate and collaborate between everybody that we work with here at Nevada County, but also that's just not the funding, but using this plan to also improve data. We are often challenged with questions like how many youth are homeless? Well, if our data is not good, then we can't answer that question. And so we're wanting to invest in Nevada County much more into our data and our data management so we can have those numbers quick at hand and also see where the trends are happening with homelessness. And with that, I've got some entertain any questions you might have, or otherwise we can move on with the program.
Thanks so much, Mike. Any questions for Mike? Great. Thank you so much again, Mike. This is really exciting progress you all are making. All right. And then kind of our last highlight before we get on to general partner updates, Diane Binder, who is the Executive Director of Human Resources at Sugar Bowl, is going to provide a little bit of a recap on what she spoke with our employers group on which is employee housing, kind of creative innovations there that they've been getting involved with. Diane, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first larger meeting that I've joined, and I appreciate the warm welcome. So I'm Diane Binder. I'm the Executive Director of Human Resources over at Sugar Bowl Ski Resort. I joined towards the end of the season. I joined in the last week of January, so I'm new to not only Sugar Bowl, but to Truckee and to our mountain community. So I appreciate you helping me learn this process and what it's like to be a member of our community up here, and of course try to do what we can for our employees in regards to housing. So one thing that I wanted to share with the group, that's something that we're hopeful for because it is so bleak and it is so challenging. One of the biggest struggles that we have is we really don't have much housing for our kind of middle manager workforce group. So we have lots of housing for our seasonal hourly workforce, which is great. But we just don't have any beds or units for our team members that maybe aren't quite, senior managers, directors, execs, that are more entry level, green, just starting out in their career. So they're not making that great of a salary, but they're with us year round full time. So they're not eligible for the seasonal housing. So back in the end of November, Sugar Bowl actually made a move to purchase a old motel located in Kingville. It's just a couple miles down the road from Sugar Bowl, and we converted that motel into housing for managers, which has been a great thing for us. There's 10 units there. There's one studio, several 1-bedroom apartments, 1 2-bedroom apartment, and a unit that can be considered a 3-bedroom apartment. If I'm able to share my screen, I'll sort of just show some pictures so you can get a visual of it. But we have found that this has been something that we're hoping will really help, because we're just losing team members left and right because they're just getting pushed out and can't afford to live up here anymore. And in such a tight labor market, there's so many job opportunities elsewhere, whether it's here or in the Bay Area, in Nevada. It's just really difficult to retain our staff, and it's really difficult for us to recruit our staff as well. So it's twofold. Not only do we have this lodge now where we can house our year-round middle managers, but we also use it as a transition for if we are able to hire someone who is coming from a different ski resort or a different part of the country. They get the sticker shock, right? They're excited about the job, and then they start looking online to find a place to live, and then they back out of the opportunity because they just realize it doesn't make sense financially for them to make the move all the way out here. So we're able to offer some of the units here in the lodge to be transitional. So we can build that into their offer and say, hey, please come and join our team. And with that, part of your relocation is we'll put you in a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom unit for 3 to 4 months, as long as you need, so that you can have plenty of time and thought to make sure that you find a place in town or somewhere on the summit that makes sense for you. So we purchased this for over $2 million, had to do a little bit of renovation inside, but we have found that this has been something that has really helped us. It's only 10 units, so it's only helping 10 employees out of our, 80 that we have that are year round. And then when we're in the season, we have upwards of 500, hopefully 600 employees. So it's a very small percentage of our team that's assisting us. But at this point, we're doing anything that we can, right? So it was a big investment, but something that we find will be helpful for us. We're just trying to turn over any stone and be as resourceful as possible. And we felt that this was a good opportunity that we needed to jump on, because there's just not a lot of housing opportunities or buildings to purchase that would work and be feasible for what we need. So I'm just showing you a couple of pictures of what it looks like. It's a pretty nice facility. Obviously, like I mentioned, it's, it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it's helping us for the time being, and hopefully giving us a little bit of stability, because we're just a little bit losing great people left and right due to the crisis right now. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you again so much for the very warm welcome. I'm excited to be able to learn from you all and be a part of this group. So thank you in advance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diane. Any questions for Diane? All right, great. Thank you so much, Diane, again for making another presentation to our group, just so that everyone is aware of all the great work you guys are doing. We look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thank you. Likewise.
All right, great. So with that, now that we've kind of gone through some of the most pressing updates and programs, are there any general partner updates that folks want to share? All right, well, great. Please do remember that you can also always kind of post your updates and upload them to our website. That really helps us in kind of keeping track of what you all are doing and figure out if maybe we want to ask you to come speak about it at one of our speaker events. So you always have that option as well. And Christina, if you want to go ahead and post that link into the chat box just so that folks have it once again, that would be fantastic. You could even just take the updates you've written down for today or just announced and just paste them in there right now so that we have them and can make sure our community and other communities are aware of them and learning from them. All right, well, with that, Hillary, if you want to go ahead and jump on to discussing some of the updates on Truckee Artist Loft and Coldstream Commons and all of the outreach you all have been doing, that would be really great as part of our partner updates.
Sure, happy to do that. Hello again, everybody. So the town of Truckee has, as well as several other local partners, has been aware of and received some comments and questions from community members about artist lofts and Coldstream Commons and sort of those new developments in town and how they have been integrating into the community. And some concerns as well. So over the past couple of months, we've worked closely with the town, Truckee Police Department, Nevada County, Truckee Tahoe Community Foundation, North Tahoe Truckee Homeless Services, Sear Community House, Community Collaborative, so sort of a long list of partners with those two housing developments and their property managers to try to address rumors and concerns and make sure that we're doing our best together as community partners to support new residents in these new developments. So I wanted to take some time to address some of that information and what we've had going on. The town with those partners did recently release a press release, so I'll put that in the chat when I'm done with information for the community on what this process has been and information on those developments as well. But first, one of the rumors that has sort of circulated around the community is that in both Coldstream and the artist lofts, that they aren't housing sort of locals, and that it was just outside residents coming in and filling those units. So we really did a deep dive into the data with the property managers to make sure that we had an understanding of that and could help dispel any misinformation. So in Coldstream Commons, 46 of the 48 units are currently occupied. Of those, only 3 households lived outside of Nevada or Placer County before moving into Coldstream Commons. And in the artist lofts, there are 76 units. Of those, 59 of the currently occupied units have tenants that were previously living in the region before moving into artist lofts. So we have met with that group of partners, with the property managers of both of those units, just to really talk about some of the challenges we've had. We have had some increase in police calls and just sort of frequent calls with certain residents. So just addressing those issues and making sure that we have really clear communication so that we have clear follow-up when issues do arise. Since we met a couple of months ago, the Truckee police have been regularly checking in with property managers just to make sure we have follow-up on any calls that we have, and we have been seeing a decrease in calls for service at both complexes, which has been really great to see. Truckee Artist Loft also has a new property manager who just started in June, and they have also agreed to hire a nighttime assistant manager to be on site so that they have somebody on site both during the day and on call or available at night as well. And we just wanted to acknowledge that it really, it does take time to build community in any new housing complex. And this is sort of an ongoing effort. We're realizing that we need to make sure we have, when we do have a new complex open up, that we really are just providing that wraparound support from all of these different organizations to make sure we can help make it a smooth transition. I really wanted to thank all of the partners who have been working with the town to help support this effort. It's been a really great example of regional collaboration, and I think we've started to see some certain improvements and sort of smoothing out some of the initial issues that we had in that transition to these two new complexes. And I'll leave it at that unless there are any specific questions.
Thanks, Hillary. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Hillary, I think this is great. You know, Truckee has shown some real forward moving leadership in action in getting affordable housing on the ground, and I applaud that. But it's not just chirping, it's loud barking in my ear almost daily that the new affordable housing projects are being, and this is the terms that are being used by folks talking to me, are being indiscriminately rented out to people that are not only not locals, but not even employed, period, much less having lined up employment locally and are moving here. So it's out of area people that may or may not even have an income that is based on a local employment, and that there are very few very high profile bad actors that are creating a really negative appraisal of the entire program. And I'm hopeful that with some of the provisions that you put into place recently, like new property management and on-site overnight and a stronger police presence, that will rectify some of these issues. But whether they're real or perceived, they are out there in force, and it's becoming a greater impediment. When I talk to people in my sphere as to the need to continue and expand this type of housing, because they say that what's on the ground is failing in a number of ways and degrading the quality of life rather than increasing it for the locals. And so I'm hopeful that as we move forward, whether, again, I'm not asserting that everything that's said is accurate, but it's out there. And so I'm hopeful that over the long term, working together, we can right the ship.
Yeah, I agree. And that's exactly why we got this group together and said we really need to proactively address this, because we do hear that this conversation is out there, and this is not good for long term for our community's support of affordable and workforce housing. So I acknowledge that there have been definitely some bumps in the road, and we're working on trying to make sure we correct those and really proactively address them, because we do want these complexes to be super successful, super supported, and integrated into our community.
Great. Any other questions for Hillary?
Yeah, Hillary, this is Steve. I'm kind of curious, now that we have good data on the facts around who the tenants in these projects are, how can we help you disseminate the information in order to help dispel some of the myths that are circulating in the community?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As I said, we did put together a press release on this, so I will post that in just a second when we're done here. Not good at multitasking. And sharing that information, if you're able to sort of repost that, to share that, if you do get questions, just we really tried to be very intentional about providing a sort of comprehensive sort of background on this is the town's role, these are the things we're doing to support housing, these are other programs we have, and then some of the facts about what we found about who is living there. So I think that's a really good resource.
Great, thanks.
And we've posted the press release here in the chat box if folks want to take a look.
Oh,
it is a really good, nice, detailed Q&A. I wonder, maybe Hillary, at some point, if it would be good to also have a page that's kind of like a myths and facts about housing in our region and who lives there, in case that might be a good addition, kind of a permanent page, even before you guys come out with housing as well. Jen, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad this subject has come up because sort of in the spirit of the last two comments, I've also heard a lot of probably mission, but with strong conviction, whether it's right or wrong, perceived or real. But then also in the spirit of being able to sort of help advocate for what's accurate. Can you, for those of us that don't stay as close to all this as we should, like me, can you give like the 2-minute elevator explanation of like, how did those people from out of the area qualify to be in this housing? And I'll tell you what I've heard is that loosely somehow, because the projects get state funding, that if it's not occupied to a certain percentage, that then the state can dip into the needs in other counties and offer up this housing for people that don't live in the area. And I don't know if that's true, but like it would help me to be able to advocate for all of this if I knew that information. Could you, like, you don't have to take a deep dive, but could you briefly like explain if that's true or not, or how that works?
That's kind of a simplified version, but so in each of the complexes, there are different types of units. So there are different area median income restrictions on certain units. So Coldstream has 24 units that are at 60% of area median income. 12 units are restricted to 30% of area median income, and those are tied to funding sources that they took for that project. And then there are 12 units there that are restricted to what are called HUD 811 units. And the 811 program is a federal program which allows persons living with disabilities to live as independently as they can. So it provides affordable and subsidized housing to provide stability and autonomy for people with significant disabilities. So we have certain residents at Coldstream who have to qualify for 811 housing in order to be in those units. Within each of the complexes, they have sort of a scoring system on how residents are selected when they apply. So they have to income qualify, and then there is prioritization for living or being local, but it is not a requirement that somebody be local. Within the artist lofts specifically, just finding the right information, there are 19 units, or 57 units are capped at 80% of area median income. And then there are 19 units that are what's called a project-based voucher. And that requires 50% of area median income or below. And the project-based vouchers undergo an application process through the Regional Housing Authority, which our regional housing authority is Sutter, Yuba, Colusa, and Nevada counties. And the Regional Housing Authority manages those applications and places those people sort of through a waitlist process into the housing. So we do have, there's sort of less local control for those 19 units. And if anybody else has additional information or wants to correct anything that I said, please jump in.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
So I think that with the community foundation being squarely at the table of the financing piece of Truckee Artist Lofts, and to keep everybody kind of reminding the nearly decades, and that's with an S, of that property kind of coming to fruition for our community. It had been over a decade since our region had seen affordable housing. And that took place, I believe, in Kings Beach with the Domus project. So as the players were able to start to pull together the very complex capital stack, if you've heard that term, it takes more than just one person with a check to make I think it was $32 million that it took to make that housing. It went to the state, I believe, Jen, 4 times for those tax credits, because we have to compete to get those dollars to make it subsidized so that private capital can build it. Because if you want to keep the rents low, there's not a lot of profit you make. So private capital doesn't come without philanthropy and state public funding. But, as a community, what we learned is, lo and behold, every source of funding has different rules related to it. And by the time we got through, I would say 2-3 years, by the time the developers were getting close to getting the tax credits, the pro forma completely changed. And I don't know if you'll remember this, but we went from stick build to modular. And that was called value engineering. So what happens is the timeline to get the funding on board has real implications for the actual cost. So you start something a decade ago, and now you're ready to go, and it has now tripled or quadrupled. And so decisions at the end for the funding sources to just get this project through, there was a final funding coming from the state. And what we have to remember in our region is the state's real housing priority is the millions of people, or are the millions of people who are homeless. So when they're giving funds out, they're also trying to solve, I think, a bigger problem than what, we're solving in our region. And so I think different pools of funds have different strings attached to it. And so as we brought those in, those vouchers, I think Hillary called them place-based vouchers, had that trigger. So what I want to tell you that is the hopeful part of this, there's 2 things that you can tell your friends, is 1, we have a really strong support system through the Community Collaborative and Allison Schwedner and Paul Bancroft and Jasmine and all these individuals who really care about how to bring our community together, how to address those health and human service needs. And with the town of Truckee and this group of partners, we're doing that wraparound that she talked about. So this is an opportunity for us to shine and make sure that as we bring in housing, we can really show up as a community and bring them. We also are getting smarter about those funding sources. And the good news is both the town and Placer now have mechanisms in place where we can have more flexible, nimble capital to define the terms of the type of housing projects that we need in our community. And with TTCF and the Martis Fund, who also had resources to bear, we are now collaboratively looking at different housing projects and how we can work differently with those funds to really manifest the kind of housing we need. Both of the projects that we're talking about today are doing what they're supposed to. And yes, we do have some individuals from out of our region, but I hope you hear it's not everybody. And yes, some of those housing units, unfortunately, some of our workforce don't qualify because they make maybe $50 more a month, right? But everybody's trying to make it work and we're learning from it. But there's already mechanisms and solutions in place that are happening. So I hope that's what people hear is we've got a strong network of partners we're paying attention and working on that solution. And then on the flip side, we already as a community are further ahead than a lot of communities trying to build that flexible, nimble capital that allows us to put that capital stack together the way that we want to. I'm sorry I took so much time, but this is one of those conversations that we've been very close to. And I see Steve Frisch shaking his head. And I would say if anybody on this call has been bird dogging this work longer, it's Steve. And so I'm going to invite you, Steve, to jump in. And if I got anything wrong in my breaking it down at the community level.
No, I just super applaud you guys for all the work you're doing to actually get the data to dispel kind of the myths that are circulating in the community, because I agree wholeheartedly with John and is it Jeannie Sharp that this has the potential to essentially create community opposition to future projects. So it's really incumbent upon us now to step forward and disseminate the information in a way that it will lead to more rational decision making later on down the line. We're not going to convince all of the critics, because there are people out there who live on criticism, right? But if we can actually inform the vast majority of the public, it will help later on down the line with future projects and the flexibility you just described, Stacy, So I think we really need to proactively get that information out in the community and just calmly give people the facts,
Great. Thanks, Steve. John, go ahead, then Allison, and then we'll take a break.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to both thank Stacy for reminding us that that these affordable housing projects don't pencil out easily at all, and that you do have to go to multiple sources to actually cobble together the resources that you need to actually do the work that you want to do on behalf of the better good of society, and not go broke doing it. And so it's important to understand that, and this is where I'm going with this. It's important to understand that as long as we rely on state and federal monies as a component or a large component of how we make affordable housing work up here, it's always going to be partially dysfunctional up here because of the huge affordability gap we have. And so it circles me back around to the way that we actually get the kind of housing that we envision is to ensure a more stable local revenue source that we have control over to utilize towards this type of housing, so that these types of issues with the strings associated with state and federal monies, like for homelessness and out of area people, can be avoided entirely by utilizing local monies and our own local standards.
John. Go ahead, Allison.
Thanks, Tara. I would just say too, like Steve, if you have ideas about how we could get the information out to the broader community, like in addition to the press release that we've shared with all of our networks, I think that I think it's a conversation that we should have, because again, it's such an ongoing issue. And I would just say too, we look at the Achievable Local Housing Bridge that the Mountain Housing Council established, this is housing for folks who fall in that orange sector. And historically as a region, we have not had housing for folks who have chronic medical conditions.
Right.
We haven't had housing for folks who are trying to, become not become homeless. So I think because we now have a different type of housing, we have to understand what project-based vouchers mean and what the 811 units mean. And I think as a community, it's the right thing to do, because again, historically, we all know people have had to move out of the area because they have needs that we can't accommodate. So I think it's just important to be mindful that we are actually meeting a community need with this kind of housing. And as a Mountain Housing Council, we have an obligation to understand that housing and then share it with people to kind of help mitigate the rumors in the community. So again, Steve, if you have ideas, I would love to talk about that.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk online, but I do think this highlights another really interesting issue. Once again, an issue for the ranch to address later on, which is, do we need a more coordinated communication strategy that we can jointly implement around these issues for the Mountain Housing Council in general, you know? Because public education is going to be incredibly important, you know?
Right.
Especially as more of these projects or even smaller projects are coming online. We have to manage the tendency of our communities to be a little NIMBY-ish, you know? And like, so we should be thinking now about how we get ahead of that.
Good point. Good point, Steve. And we'll talk a bit more about what partners and maybe outside community folks we can bring together to talk about a strategy that might make sense as a gathering. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. We will be back at 9:50. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everyone. It was a fast break. We are going to go ahead and launch right into our working group and program updates. So I'm going to go ahead and give the floor back to Steve Frisch, President of Sierra Business Council, to discuss the policy working group updates.
Great, Tara. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So I'm going to try to keep this brief since I'm looking at the timeline here. Once again, our policy working group is meeting on a regular basis. Our last meeting was June 21st. The links to our meeting notes and our legislative tracking list are in the agenda. So if you want to look at specific work of the group or the specific pieces of legislation that we're tracking, you can find them there. But I'll touch on just a few of them now. And then also, once again, as always, I want to thank the working group members for their input, their ideas, their all of the contributions to the effort. This is a tough thing to keep track of, and they're all really good at it. So really appreciate all of the help. A quick update on policy actions over the last quarter. We've continued to weigh in on a number of different bills on a regular basis, but probably the biggest thing that happened was that the final California budget passed on June 14th. It included a total of $308 billion. $227 billion was from state sources and $81 billion from federal sources. And California has now, across all of its different reserve funds, about $74 billion in reserves firewalled against the threat of a recession. So, everyone is an amateur economist and is projecting either recession or no recession, but we're in better shape now than I think we've ever been to weather a recessionary period. So we're hopeful that if we do see a downturn in the economy, it's not going to lead to a substantial hit, particularly in the housing fundings. Many of those priorities in the budget were programmed out over a 2 to 3 year timeline in order to address some of the concerns about the GAN limit, which many of you know requires that excess funds be redistributed back to taxpayers if we exceed a certain level of reserves. So the state's process to address that issue was to program funds out over a multi-year period. This year's budget included $9 billion in affordable housing funding and $8 billion in homelessness funding, which is a slight decrease from the 2021-22 budget year. But it's important to note that 2021 was almost 50% higher than any previous year in relationship to percentage of the budget. So clearly the state adopting a new state housing plan with a goal of 150,000 new units a year is having an impact on how much of the budget relative to the overall budget is being focused on housing. We do expect that slight adjustments will be made to the housing budget in what's known as a budget junior bill, which is being negotiated right now and is likely to lead to an increase of about $300 million in additional funding for housing. There are a couple of our priorities this year that saw slight increases, but not the increases we asked for, most notably the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, which is available to local governments, saw an increase, but not the $500 million we were seeking, only about $150 million. And then the Disaster Resilience Housing Fund that we've been advocating for is still in play, which I think is important. SBC has also been meeting on a regular basis with statewide coalitions and housing organizations. I think, as you know, we regularly coordinate with the Rural Smart Growth Task Force, Housing California, and the California Coalition for Rural Housing. I wanted to let you all know that there's a new statewide housing advocacy group called the Affordable Housing Climate Solutions Group that is looking at the nexus between climate and housing. And it was founded statewide by Cal YIMBY, the Turner Center, and Cal Environmental Voters. And that group, which we've been regularly participating in, has some real horsepower. They've been working on looking at some specific issues, including new and expanded definitions of infill development. And they've been very open to the idea of a separate rural infill development definition that would be more favorable to building housing in rural communities. Also, new approaches to kind of increasing density through something similar to SB 50 that was proposed and did not pass a couple years ago, and looking at a rural town center kind of inclusion in an SB 50 light should it emerge next year. Looking at wildland urban interface planning issues, specifically the issue of kind of a standards-based approach to addressing housing in the wildland urban interface, as opposed to the moratoriums on development in the wildland urban interface that have been proposed previously by several legislators, and looking at reforms to insurance coverage in order to link wildfire mitigation activities to reduced insurance rates. So this group has been really rewarding to be a part of, and is really building a lot of kind of power in the discussion, which is helpful. We've also been coordinating on a regular basis with the California Coalition for Rural Housing on updates to two specific programs: the Affordable Housing Preservation Tax Credit Program, which looks at making sure that as affordable housing is at risk of conversion to market rate housing, that it can be preserved through tax credit financing. And then also creating, as I previously mentioned, this new disaster resilience revolving loan fund for housing in order to address displacement issues from wildfire. So many of you know that both the Dixie Fire and the Caldor Fire put some pressures on our housing market in Truckee and in the North Lake Tahoe region. So we're hoping in the long run that if this disaster resilience revolving loan fund can be set up, it will provide homeowners with low interest loans to rebuild quickly in areas that have been impacted by wildfire. SBC has also been digging in pretty deep on AB 2011, which is the WICS bill that would open new sites for affordable and mixed income housing development and tie it to creating apprenticeship programs for labor in those projects. This is a really important issue because as you all know, any project that takes state funding requires the payment of prevailing wage. So this program would actually allow affordable and mixed income housing development to move forward if there are identified apprenticeship programs serving those construction sites. And the impact that would have is it would reduce the labor cost at those sites by roughly 25%, which would make affordable housing more affordable to build. And this is really the first time in several years that anyone has attempted to address this prevailing wage issue on affordable housing. We thought it was so important that we would try to weigh in on that. And our weigh-in has been in three ways: meeting with WIC staff on improvements to the bill, meeting with the California Building Trades Council and their leader, Robbie Hunter, who's working on this issue, on the Building Trades Council's opposition to the bill and trying to moderate that opposition. And then working also with the now Northern California Regional Council of Carpenters, who is supporting the bill on coordinating support in the legislature. That bill will be heard August 1st in Senate Appropriations. And we are anticipating that this is likely to pass this year now, since the opposition of the Building Trades Council has been diminishing. And then we've also been meeting with legislators on a wildfire standards-based approach to wildland urban interface mitigation. So many of you will remember that Senator McGuire had a piece of legislation last year called SB 12, which would have severely restricted development in the wildland urban interface or any region that was either a very high hazard zone or a high hazard zone in California. That bill has since died in the legislature, but the prevailing kind of concept moving forward now and likely to be addressed in legislation next year is tying building in wildland urban interface, very high hazard zone and high hazard zone areas to a standards-based approach where if communities have a community wildfire protection plan, an updated safety element, and specific wildfire mitigation standards met in the individual development, that they would be able to move forward without intervention by the state to or by state legislation to block development, which we think is really important in our region, since a lot of our region is in wildland urban interface. So, and then we continue to track about 20 bills of interest, many of which will be addressed in August in the legislature, and the link to all of that legislation is in your packet. So the next working group meeting is August 22nd at 2 p.m. Of course, everyone's welcome to participate, but really happy to have the participation of all of our group at this point. I think we'll have a lot more data on which of the bills that we've been tracking are actually moving forward this year by August 20th. There are no more committee meetings, so after the first week of August. So in essence, by the second week in August, everything will either need to be going to the floor or will likely not be making it through this year. So, and then for future reference, our meeting schedule is the fourth Monday of every month, and then as needed when the legislature is not in session. So with that, I'll stop and open for any questions. Great.
Thanks so much, Steve, as always. All right, I'm going to provide just a brief overview of the partners and community members who have come to speak with our private business employers housing network since the last quarterly in April. In late April, we had Shauna Purvines with Placer County come and speak about their deed restriction program and to what extent employers can get involved with it. In May, we had a developer Land Partners join us to discuss an upcoming proposal for housing development in Truckee and how local employers can best take advantage of it for their employees once it does come to fruition. In June, we had Diane Binder from Sugar Bowl, who also spoke with us today. She spoke very similarly about their employee housing and kind of creative and innovative projects they're doing around that. And then this month, next Thursday on July 28th, we will have Chelsea Delia of the Rice team at Guild Mortgage join us to learn about how employers can help employees purchase homes in our region specifically. So please do feel free to pass that info on and join us. As always, our events are free, and our meeting next week with the employers network is from 12 to 1, again on Thursday, July 28th. Next, I'm going to have Kathy Foley with North Tahoe Truckee Homeless Services provide us with updates on the Supportive Housing and Homelessness Working Group and the point in time count. Kathy?
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some updates and really just want to say thank you to everybody in this group. I've been in this community for 31 years, and it's really hopeful to see what this team of people has been able to advance us in over the last few years. And so first, we have these are our regular attendees that are working together to address homelessness and supportive housing and creative options here in the area. And like all the groups, we invite anybody else who might be interested to plug in and be part of that. Our next meeting, I think is on the next slide here, is July 27th from 2:30, and typically we have a running date of the fourth Wednesday of each month, and sometimes it's every other month. And so if you're interested in being part of this, reach out to Christina and we'll make sure to get you on that list. The next piece we'll go over real quick is the point in time count. We spent a lot of time together discussing this before the count, and we're really appreciative for Sierra Business Council and Jill, who stepped in to help, as well as United for Action and Cassie Hebel from Downtown Merchants Association, to help us get our point in time count completed this year. And so the point in time count represents a count of our homeless neighbors at one point in time. Typically it's done in January of each year. This year, because of COVID, we did it at the end of February. And it's not comprehensive as it's done, and we're looking at just people who slept in a certain place on one night of the year. And but it is one data point, and it's used to drive the funding and services that become available here in Eastern County. So the numbers here, we had 30 unsheltered neighbors in Nevada County that were counted, and 11 that were counted in Placer County. And then the two distinctions are, we had folks that were unsheltered. So those folks actually slept outside or in a car or in another place not meant for habitation each night. And then we had neighbors that were technically homeless, but they were sheltered. So the North Tahoe Truckee Homeless Services Emergency Warming Center was open that night, and we had a total of 10 people, 8 from Nevada County and 2 from Placer County. We also had 4 individuals that were counted that were in the emergency room project, which means they had temporary interim housing in a hotel room in the area as they were working on a housing plan. And then Sierra Community House had 9 individuals that they were serving on that night. So these numbers are pretty consistent with the numbers we counted the year before. Although we've also housed a lot of the people that we counted the year before. So what we're seeing is that homelessness is a challenge in this area, but we're making a dent in it by what we're doing. And so here's the one point in time. The next slide here will share what we're doing on a daily basis to understand what's happening with homeless needs in this community. So there are the real-time numbers, and Mike Dent referred to the homeless management information system, and he referred to the larger picture of the homeless plan, which our organization works really hard to be part of that plan and implement things here in Eastern County, which 10 years ago weren't served at all in this community. And in 2015, when the Emergency Warming Center started, was the first time we actually had representation in Eastern Placer and Nevada County. So the data that he was referring to is information when someone calls 211 or they call the 833 number in Placer County, or they enter the system through our services or the hospital, and note that they're unhoused in some sort of way, they end up being implemented into the homeless management information system that creates a real-time list of people that are currently experiencing homelessness. And then our team, along with Nevada County and all the other partners that are serving these individuals, meet to discuss housing plans and connections to services. And some of those things happen where people are able to be housed in our community, and other times we're connecting with other partners that have programs that work better for them. So these real-time numbers are what we're looking at on a regular basis to help us guide programs and supportive housing and developing right-sized programs for this region. And now I'm going to just share with you the quick overview of the summary of programs from this last fiscal year. And we still have the Emergency Warming Center program that goes on, and that's a space that opens when it's 15 degrees or less, a foot or more of snow, or other very severe weather conditions. So our neighbors that are accessing this service typically are our long-term chronically homeless neighbors that live outside, or folks that arrive here in an emergency situation. So last year we had 54 individuals that came through, and we provided 331 overnight stays. And then we had unhoused neighbors that chose to stay in their cars or stay outside, but came in for dinner and being part of a community and accessing case management type services. So as of our end of our 7th season, we see that this is still a program, although it's only available when it's very severe, really serves our most vulnerable neighbors. The second program is the Emergency Day Respite Center, and Mike referred to a navigation center, which this is sort of in that format, where it allows people to come in when they're experiencing being unsheltered and then access a host of basic necessity services or connections to other services. And so the Emergency Day Center is still open 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. And we served a total of 306 individuals that came through this last year. And some of that number is our chronically homeless neighbors that live here on a regular basis. Part of those are folks that became newly homeless in our community. Some are living in cars and working. And then other times folks find themselves unhoused and in the community for a short period of time. So folks are able to access a meal, a shower, laundry. And once someone's been part of the system for 2 weeks, we're able to start supporting them with some case management. And so this is a space where people, if someone's been here, a lot of times they're having a hard time moving on or getting a job because they've lost their ID or their social security card. And so we start with basics of helping people get the things that they need, connecting to the medical that they might need. We are talking about housing plans with people. We're helping complete those applications and people to move in. We're helping people to resolve legal issues that they might have, connections to other agencies, some that are available within our community, but many that are still outside in Western County. And then we're helping a lot of people connect to family and friends and often move out of the area. And so a space for people to navigate what their next step is versus just being stuck here. And so the next piece of the puzzle is street outreach. There's been a street outreach position in this community since 2016, and it was housed at Sierra Community House. When North Tahoe Truckee Homeless Services expanded in 2020, that position moved over to our agency in 2021. We worked very closely with that individual in the past. And so now we have Honora, and her phone number is here, who along with one of our other staff will go out and meet people right where they are. They'll respond to phone calls from the community who call and say, I've talked to this person, I'm worried about them. Have you met them? Stop by. We respond to calls from the police and the hospital. And although it's not instant, it's something that allows us to go access people who aren't coming into services and learn about someone in our community who is unhoused. Then we have next piece is the emergency room project, which Mike also alluded to, which is interim housing in emergency situations. And so in our community, we were able to help 3 households with long-term stays in local hotels while they worked on housing plans. One was a local long-term family with children. Another is was an older gentleman who's a veteran who had been homeless for many years, but was actively ready to work on a housing plan. And being able to give people that stability while they work on a housing plan is key to them being able to stay in our community. We also provide short-term stays on occasion, whether it's in combination with Tahoe Forest Hospital, as someone is released from the hospital and they don't have a place to go and they need a place to recover for a period of time. We have neighbors who decide they're ready to go into treatment, and we are able to help them with a safe place to stay as we work on finding them a bed often and transporting them out of the area to those services that we don't have here. And there's other times when there's an emergency. So we had 6 different neighbors that we helped in that way this past year. Next, we have the big piece of the puzzle, which is ending homelessness with housing. And it's a time to celebrate because it's the first time in this community that we've ever been able to do that. Each year, we're able to share, provide housing or find housing for a couple different individuals, but most of the time we're moving people out of the area. And so of the 40 households that we housed, 27 of those individuals were chronically homeless, meaning that they've lived outside for a year or more and they have some type of disabling condition. And then 17 of those were newly unhoused. So neighbors that found themselves in the situation. And so one example, just to put a name and a face to some of these neighbors that we're talking about that have been able to take advantage of the housing at both Artist Lofts and Coldstream that were mentioned, in addition to the others, are, I'll share with you a story of Sam and Mary, who are both in their late 70s. They lived in this area for 42 years. And like many locals, they lost their housing during the pandemic. And they didn't have any family support. They found themselves unhoused for the first time in their lives. And thankfully, they connected themselves to Sierra Community House, who connected them to our organization. And with the support of the Homeless Outreach Coordinator, they were able to connect to the needed resources to qualify for one of the new below market rate apartments right here in Truckee. And thanks to this type of housing and support services, they could afford the rent with their Social Security incomes, continue to access the doctors and support services they built over the years in this area, and remain in this community. So, for example, this is a couple that was living on Social Security of about $2,000 a month. So they did fall into that really low income of 30% area median income. And they were able to move into an apartment, and their rent, they pay 30% of their income. So they were paying $600 a month for their rent, and it allowed them to have $1,400 a month for their utilities, for food, for medical needs. And they were able to be in this community. So there's one success story of why this very low income housing on that orange scale is a huge gift to this region. Then we go to the other side of a chronically homeless neighbor. And so we had a chronically homeless neighbor, we'll call him Ben, who grew up in Truckee as a child. And in his 30s, he had an accident and found himself disabled. And then he found himself unhoused shortly after that. At that time, he came back here to Truckee, where he had been living in our community outside for the last 10 years. Ben was one of those fortunate people who we were able to help him get an emergency housing voucher. And once he knew he had a housing voucher and he was going to have a roof over his head, he stopped his drinking immediately. And for the 20 days prior to us being able to move him into his apartment, he was completely sober. And now he's been housed for 3 months. He's still sober. He has goals of focusing on his art that he's really gifted with and hasn't been able to do the last 10 years. He's been able to reconnect with family and friends because of the changes he's been able to make. And he's currently looking for a part-time job. So that's another experience of where when someone's living outdoors, they don't have that basic stability that allows them to heal and take steps forward in what they need to do. So just two stories that really, in my heart, I'm grateful that these neighbors are able to stay and be part of our community. Next, we have a clarification again of, who these neighbors are. So 27 of the neighbors that moved into housing are from Nevada County. 15 were from Placer County, and 2 were from outside of this area. 43% of those neighbors had been here 10 years or longer, down to the 14% 5 to 9 years, 32% 1 to 4 years, and 11% less than a year. So these are people that are mostly part of the fabric of our community. And then even when neighbors aren't here long term and they find housing, whether they're unhoused or whether they come into our community with the money to become housed, there's a rotating piece of humanity where, for many years we have folks that were born here in Truckee, California, that are homeless in other communities. And so as a community, it's a huge gift to be able to recognize our responsibility to provide housing for that whole rainbow. And I'm so grateful for Mountain Housing Council and everybody that's helping in those different pieces. My specialties on this very low income side, but every single person within our community, those 9,500 units that Mountain Housing Council's identified we need, is making a difference. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. Any questions for Kathy? Great. Thank you again, Kathy, for all of your hard work and dedication. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and provide a quick update on our seasonal workforce housing pilot program, which Kathy and others are active in. Just to let you all know that we have, a meeting set up with the various locations that our community and our partners were polled on and kind of came up with a final list on. We have done a lot of kind of behind the scenes work with folks who work in the county in which things would be located in, which would be Placer County. We've done a lot of research on liability insurance and other issues that folks have had questions on, like trash collection, snow load, things like that, and we have all of that compiled. Yesterday, we had a joint Mountain Housing Council Forest Futures speaker event, which we mentioned earlier, on kind of the dire housing circumstances for regional forest workers and firefighters and how this can impact our forests and our housing and our safety. And we just continue to kind of hold the crucial meetings that we need to hold to try to secure a location and secure additional partners for us to basically come to the community next month, hold meetings, chat with the community about having this pilot program, which, as I've mentioned before, is based on the Summit County model. It is a safe parking based program. It would be open to local workforce only that makes up to 120% AMI. And ideally, some of the units would also be set aside for forest workers and firefighters in our region specifically. So that's kind of an update on where we are. We're still hoping for a September move-in. I don't know if folks have any questions on that, but I will be sending out an update email as well to our broader Tiger team later today. So that's an update on, a lot of the requests that our partners made for us to look into a van life camping solutions type, kind of program, temporary housing on publicly owned land, either summertime or wintertime workforce housing in a number of different potential locations. Great. Okay, so Steve, if it's all right with you, I'd like to turn things back over to you to provide us with an update on the hub.
Thanks, Tara. Sure. By the way, one interesting thing on the van life temporary housing situation that has been coming up in public policy discussions in Sacramento lately, because there are a number of communities around California looking at similar solutions. So I know there's a group in Santa Cruz working on a similar project, a group in Eureka working on a similar project. So I think this is something that might get some traction next year. But okay, so a quick update on the Housing Hub. Many of you remember that the Housing Hub proposal was included in the Regional Housing Action Plan. I want to thank the working group members that have been participating in the group. We met for our second time last month. These have been pretty in-depth and spirited conversations about what the role of the hub is, exactly what the work products would be, the work necessary to move forward with a business plan for the hub. So this has been very rewarding to actually be working with this group of people who are really innovative thinkers around this issue. The basic theory behind the Housing Hub, you guys will remember, it was identified in the Regional Housing implementation plan as a means of essentially implementing some of the goals of the RHIP. It was intended to tier off of the tools that were created for the RHIP and that are intended to be ongoing products, like the matrix of tools available at all of the jurisdictions to incentivize housing. And then the concept here was that we would link those tools to 10 priority projects in the community, in the broader geography, and substantially increase those 10 projects' readiness to the point where they're either submitting or approved applications within 5 years. It's a lofty and difficult to achieve goal, as I think many of you know. The idea is that once you go through this technical assistance and kind of process to get assistance with moving projects forward, that then those projects could be linked to community capital if they meet all of those community capital standards for their own direction, like the trust fund or other, TTCF funds or other things that are available locally, and that community capital would help leverage other funding or private funding to move a variety of different types of projects forward. It is generally agreed that the target for the housing hub, the target market for the housing hub, is landowners and kind of small to medium sized developers. This is not intended to, although it would serve anybody, it's not intended really to be an alternative to the larger affordable housing developer kind of community that has in-house shops that are really good at putting that capital stack together. This is more of an incremental development strategy, and it's a strategy that would also address achievable housing. As a matter of fact, probably primarily address achievable housing. The basic services envisioned for the hub are providing technical assistance directly to landowners and developers to advance projects, managing programs that are necessary in the community where the capacity doesn't already exist to manage those programs. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not there's a need for some kind of regional deed restriction management program that theoretically could be incorporated within the hub later on down the line, acting as an intermediary and a project navigator for property owners to either hold property or hold funds or do other things that are necessary to move projects forward, and then improving access to capital. And that would be both community capital and public capital from either local, state, or federal sources through grant programs and other things. The key activity of the working group has been working on a housing hub business canvas to envision what needs to be included within a business plan. So we've done a pretty thorough vetting of that business canvas. We're really looking at some changes that need to be made in order to move forward with the business plan. And that really is our next step. We have not set the next group meeting yet because we want to have a draft business plan to go through when we do that. So the next steps on this are Sierra Business Council and TTCF working together to draft that housing hub business plan, continuing with the fundraising around the hub. And Stacy has been quite adept at raising some of the funds necessary for startup already. We'll continue to work on that. And then the next meeting of the Housing Hub Working Group will focus on kind of a deeper dive in that Housing Hub business plan. We hope to have the first draft of the business plan by October, and it would be our desire, if we can get agreement around the business plan and the funding components, to launch the Housing Hub next year. So I don't know, Tara, if you want to add anything from TTCF's perspective.
Just that it's been really helpful to meet with our various community partners and kind of find out about new services and entities that I wasn't even aware of that are out there, and kind of how we can really fill in the gap best, especially when it comes to attracting capital and using the hub for that. And making sure that we complement, like you mentioned, we complement what's already out there. and simply support it, and with no intention of duplicating what's already out there. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like what we're constructing here through this group over the last 5 years is essentially a housing support ecosystem, right? So every piece of that ecosystem has to play a unique, defined, and needed role. But to the extent that they overlap or duplicate, it actually reduces efficiency, right? So I think that is one of the struggles in this process, is making sure that we're all propping up and supporting each other rather than duplicating services.
Right. Thanks. Awesome, Steve. Any questions for Steve on the hub? All right, great. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
In terms of Mountain Housing Council, upcoming business and events and opportunities, other than the meetings and events this month that have already been mentioned in terms of our employers meetings and our supportive housing and homelessness group, I just wanted to let folks know that, kind of pursuant to requests that partners have made since our emergency planning last year, one of those requests was to kind of start to compile ongoing and continuous research on what all mountain towns are doing to solve their housing crises, so that it could be used as a resource by any partners who are interested. So I just wanted to let you all know we have basically compiled that list. It is kind of a living document that we will continue to add to. So if anyone is interested in kind of getting that research, just to shoot me an email, and I would be happy to send that on if you think that would be helpful at all, or if you have some ideas that you'd like to add to it as well, that would be helpful as well. All right. And then also just wanted to announce that we do have some important position openings at TTCF that Christina will go ahead and post a link to those. I can actually post that right now. There's 4 open positions. If folks kind of want to spread the word, get that word out, disseminate that information, that would be great. We are rapidly expanding, and every single person who works at TTCF ends up working on housing as well, just because we need lots of help. So we need as many great applicants as we can possibly get. And finally, also just to let folks know that we do have additional events that are being posted in the chat box, as well as partner updates, for example, an important TRPA meeting that's coming up as well. So just to make sure you check out the chat box as well. All right, so at this time, I want to go ahead and open things up to public comments. If anyone has anything else they want to chat about or announce, please do go ahead and take the floor. Christina has the public engagement protocol posted up there, as she always does. Thanks, Christina. All right, great. Well, with that, we will go ahead and close early today. I just want to thank everyone again for being here and for all of the time and commitments you put into our many meetings and Tiger teams and speaker events. I know it's a long haul, but we're making significant progress, as I think our partners highlighted today. We're using our lessons learned to kind of reemerge and come up with new strategies even before we get going again. Christina, you can go ahead and post our future quarterly meeting dates. As you know, they're every 3 months. So we will see you all again soon. And please, again, do join us for our other free events in the meantime. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Christina.
Dan, do you need me to keep this link open for you? Am I okay to end the meeting? I'm going to assume it's okay. Thank you.